Evet, başlayayım mı? Shall we start?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
YouTube is okay as well.
Okay, thank you. Öncelikle herkese merhabalar diyorum Docomo Türkiye adına. Bugün 20. kuruluş yıl dönümümüzü kutluyoruz. Bizimle birlikte olduğunuz için hepinize çok teşekkür ederiz. Aslında 2002 yılında 20 kişi olarak bu yolculuğa çıkmıştık ve o günden bugüne aslında modern mimarlık mirasının hem gündemde olması hem de korunması yolundaki çeşitli çalışmaları hep birlikte yürüttük. Bu konuda en önemsediğimiz noktalardan biri de aslında toplumsal kabulü arttırmak ve bir tür toplumsal aktivizmi oluşturabilmek, desteklemek. Dolayısıyla hepimizin bu sürece katılımı konusundaki alışkanlığı aslında biraz oluşturabilmekti. Birçok etkinlikte birlikte olduk. Bugün 20. yılımızın anısına düzenlediğimiz bugün de çok mutlu sonla biten bir hikayeyi konu alacak. Preston Bus Station'ın bir yıkım tehdidiyle başlayan ve en sonunda da bir koruma ödülüyle biten hikayesini bu süreçte hem bilimsel hem de aktivist destek sağlayan Sally Stone'dan dinliyor olacağız. Şimdi izin verirseniz aynı girizgahı İngilizce olarak da yapmak istiyorum yabancı konuklarımız için. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of Docomo Turkey. We are very happy to celebrate Docomo Turkey's 20th anniversary. Beginning from our first foundation days, we worked hard to raise public awareness and underline the importance of public participation for the preservation of modern architectural heritage. And as well, we try to convince the decision makers in order to gain legal preservation status for those buildings. Our guest today is Sally Stone, who was involved in the success story of rescuing Preston Bus Station. The story started with demolition threat and ended up with a preservation award. As to introduce Sally, she is working as an academician in the Manchester School of Architecture, and at the moment she's in Venice as a visiting professor. As to name her recent publications, Undoing Buildings, Adaptive Reuse and Cultural Memory from Routledge Press in 2019, Emerging Practices in Architectural Pedagogy, Accommodating an Uncertain Future, again from Routledge Press in 2021, and Inside Information, The Defining Concepts of Interior Design from RIBA Publishing in 2022. So I would like to give floor to Sally, and we will be very happy to hear about the whole process. Yes, Sally.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Docomo Turkey for the absolute honor it is to make this presentation at your 20th anniversary. And thank you to Yildiz and the team for the invitation. So let me share screen. And hopefully we've rehearsed this, it will work. So share screen. Yes?
Excellent. Yeah, it works.
So merhaba. So thank you for the introduction, but a little bit about why I've been introduced. I have been, as Yildiz says, I'm an academic working in Manchester, and a lot of my publications have been about reuse of buildings and the importance of the existing building and retaining those existing buildings. And as such, interior architecture, adaptive reuse, my publications have been quite formative in the definition of the subject. And oh, come on, there we are. A methodology for the analysis of the subject, and also they've developed an approach to the teaching of adaptive reuse within the academic environment. I've also curated a number of exhibitions related to adaptive reuse, the existing building, contextualism, and the relationship between art and architecture. And I run a graduate or postgraduate atelier at the Manchester School of Architecture called Continuity in Architecture. And we look at the existing built environment and how it can be adapted and changed, but retain the sort of the qualities that already exist. So, brutal activism, saving Preston Bus Station. This is a project that is a couple of years old now, but I think is interesting because of the activism element in there. Buildings outlast civilization. Throughout history, buildings have been used, reused, and adapted. They survive as cultures and civilizations change. The already built provides a direct link with the past. It's a connection with the very building bricks of our society. The existing tells a tale or story of how a particular culture evolved. A simple building may tell a story of how depict a moment in time. It may relate to a particular sensibility or a specific era. A more complex collection of structures may have a more elaborate story to tell. Georges Silvetti describes this direct link with the past as part of our fundamental urban condition. He links the physical survival of particular elements of any building environment with the spiritual survival of our civilization. And it is this visibility and durability of the physical man-made environment that are testimonies to the societies that produce them. And I quote Silvetti, "At the risk of sounding too partisan and biased, I would say that even in historic times, documents were not always available, and buildings, that is, monuments, vernacular constructions, and public works, are themselves important texts, often providing the first and most lasting impression of a culture. Places are also defined by the people who live within them. As individuals and communities, we attach deep significance to the places that we know, and thus complex relationships can develop between the residents and the places they inhabit. This quality that is present in the nature of the buildings and streets is often generated by the actions of local people, many of whom believe their identity is essentially tied to the place that they inhabit. Most people live close to where they work, and therefore their activities form the environment and create the character of this place, the place. This local distinctiveness is characterized by the activities that occur within the specific environment. Thus, significant markers are formed in our present and in our past, which allow us to relate to a particular environment. Events that hold value in a community are often manifested in physical form and therefore allow us to trace back meanings and connections with our past. This organization of the past seems to stimulate social cohesion and the feeling of being part of a community. And so physical links with the past are often important elements within the cohesion of a community. Thus, all environments are different, and all have evolved their own and individual characteristics. Places, whether interiors, buildings, situations, or large urban developments, are particular to their situation and have been formed by a huge collection of different factors. Menning and Jackson celebrate these circumstances. One of the greatest riches of Earth is its immense variety of places. Individually, of places that is fundamental characteristic of subtle and immense importance. So Preston is a small provincial city in the northwest of England. It's an estuary town. We can see it in the centre here, well positioned on a ridge above the floodplains of the River Ribble. You can see the river running through here. And it's such a strategic point that there were settlements here in the Bronze Age. The tidal river certainly provided a safe landing point that allowed for relatively straightforward travel across the country into Yorkshire, Northumberland, and the East Coast, while also offering the first safe crossing of the river for north-south visitors. The Normans built an important fort just a couple of miles away, and it's one of the few places mentioned in the rather hazy record of the Northwest in England in the Domesday Book. And the name of the city is thought to derive from Priest Town, the Old English Anglo-Saxon Presta turn, the ton of the priest, which shows its pre-Reformation relationship with the string of abbeys that cross the country, approximately this latitude, ending in Fountains Abbey in the North Yorkshire. And in some respects, it's a typical North industrial city. By virtue of its connection with the cotton industry, it experienced massive expansion in the 18th and 19th centuries. And by 1867, it possessed 70 factories. Charles Dickens, that famous Victorian author, used Preston as a model for Coketown, the industrial town described in his book, Hard Times. And there's a fantastic description of the town in the book. It was a town of red brick, and of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. It was a town of machineries and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves for ever and never got uncoiled. It had a black canal in it and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye, and vast piles of buildings full of windows where there was a rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. This rapid development of the town destroyed many of the medieval structures, but the pattern of the city centre, to the most part, was retained. Indeed, many of the small streets, or to use the Lancashire term, wines, to the south of Fishergate, reflect the pre-industrial routes and the field patterns. It was one of the founding members of the English Football League and the first team to win the double. And the town, after a massive downturn after the Industrial Revolution, experienced another surge of optimism at the beginning of the second half of the 20th century. Slums were cleared to accommodate the redevelopment of the city centre, and steps were taken to ease traffic congestion with the construction of a bypass. But it was a dirty, dirty Victorian town that suffered from industrial blight. And in the middle of this farrago of different styles and approaches was constructed and I quote from Pevner, marvellously brutal bus station, which was constructed in 1969 by BDP architects. It's incredibly long and elegant building and is reputed the largest bus station in Europe. It contains several layers of series of car parks situated on extended floor plates with upturned curving parapets, which appear to float over a double height space of the public concourse, the interior of which still contains the rubber flooring, timber benches, white tiled walls. It's a significant building, and it's an enormous and elegant 171 meters long, and can quite fairly be described as a landmark, and therefore an important element within the collective memory of the city. The building itself very much reflects the confident and positive attitude that was prevalent at that time. After all, it was opened in the same year that the first man walked upon the surface of the moon. And for a provincial town to construct such a building shows bold self-confidence in the place itself and also in the future of public transport. The architectural language of the building can be described as brutal, in that it's constructed from raw concrete, but it was also designed to emulate an airport. Even the different bus stops were referred to as gates. The post-industrial economic downturn hit Preston as hard as any other northern provincial English city. But with the conviction typical of the early 21st century, the City Council were encouraged to embark upon an ambitious programme of city centre development. This is the interior. Just before we carry on a bit, you can tell it's on the cusp of the analog digital age, because the clocks, if you look at the clocks, they've got both analog and digital. Now, quite interestingly, the bus station itself was so neglected. It was never refurbished, and it wasn't particularly well looked after. And it was the digital clocks that broke. The analog ones continued. And you can see the original timber screens and the original acrylic numbering at the edges and the signs. So the unfulfilled tithe barn scheme, the council were proposing to knock the building down and replace it with this shopping centre, ironically designed by the same architects, BDP architects, the same architects who designed the original building. The idea was that it would encourage more people to come and visit the place, spend more money, and encourage growth. And by virtue of the position of the bus station in the centre of the city, positioned between the market and the proposed department store, the bus station was a casualty of this project. What initially saved the bus station from this tithe barn scheme was the financial crisis, and combined with the internet. And the developers realised that a shopping centre, the future of shopping was not in shopping centres, it was in out-of-town shopping centres and the internet. And they began to seriously question their involvement with Preston. And the City Council attempted to negotiate with other developers, but everyone was beginning to question the future of the shopping centre. It's also saved by all those 45 years of neglect where it hadn't been refurbished. So the original fittings and the original quality of the building was still there. However, the council still felt that the bus station was a huge burden, that everyday running costs were about £1,000, that's £1,000 sterling a day, and the number of people using public transport had considerably fallen since the building was constructed. So without even a real development plan for the city centre, the City Council proposed to demolish the building. Now, this is in 2013. They said if they have a huge area of open land right next to the city centre, then if it were to be demolished, then it would be a fantastic piece of land to be acquired by a future developer. And they passed a motion within 6 months to demolish the building. This proactive act actually galvanised various groups that were campaigning to save the building and proved to be the impetus for a number of projects. It was reported in the national news, in the architectural press, and this is the National Civil Engineering Press as well. And the architects themselves had a vote, the best building that they designed over their 61 years that they were in existence. For a long time, the bus station was winning, but at the last moment, it came second. So there was a lot of momentum publicly for and nationally to save this building. But it had been refused listing, so there was absolutely nothing that could be done to save it. And the council had commissioned the bulldozers for it to go in. So this is when we formed Gate 81. And it was in the face of this intended demolition. And it was a collaboration between me as an academic and an art director, Ruth Heritage. And we are both residents of the city, and we believe that the building was a major cultural landmark that should be preserved and creatively adapt to serve the city. We were convinced that it could act as a key building, a public space to make Preston accessible and temper the decay that was and actually still is affecting the city. So we set off on a series of activism projects, small, local, on-the-ground projects, working with the local press, with local people, to raise the profile of the building. And this reflects the position of the architect. The architect is no longer, and to quote Corb, the the role of architecture, it's greater than the masterly correct and magnificent play of masses brought together in light. The architect has moved much more to be an enabler, innovator, strategic designer. And disruptions and care of people becomes more and more important. And this uncovering of alternative practices can define a different way of working. And this is the way architecture is moving. So the first thing we did, the specific intention of Gate 81 was to create a series of projects that would bring greater attention to the plight of Preston Bus Station. And the first act that we did was to empower people with knowledge. Almost the complete archive of BDP architects had been lost in a fire at their storage warehouse in the 1980s. So there was no drawn record of the bus station. So we commissioned a set of drawings of the bus station, and you can see, yeah, can't find the plan. And these were made publicly available so that anyone who wanted to could do a project for it. And we set up a website and broadcast these different projects that were made. So people had ideas about these. The proposals were exhibited on our Gate 81 website. And then we had a series of physical projects. And these are some of the examples of the projects that we were getting. Now, alongside this, we were working on publicity. So the local radio station were reporting on our campaign, which sort of 7:15 on a sort of wind-blown cold morning, meeting a reporter at the bus station was hard, but it was actually worth it. And we're also on local television and in the local newspapers. So these are a series of the projects that were on the bus on our website. There's also at that time, there was a passion play, an Easter passion play was held. This looks a little bit like a photo montage, but it's actually it is a proper photograph of an event that was held at the bus station itself. And this is from children's television. One of the presenters was from Preston, and they had a program about a song on children's television about it. And we then held a series of poetry readings, a midnight poetry reading called Journey to the End of the World. And this was staged, as you see, in 2013, almost exactly, on the night of the equinox. And it used the interior of the bus station as a continuous stage. And as those reciting their poetry moved around the building, so the audience followed them, using the very character of the spaces to emphasize the emotion of the performance. So poetry was sort of sung into the echo of the stairwells, shouted in the massiveness of the ground floor concourse, and whispered in the darkness of the disused retail units. And the most ambitious project was the workshop or hack lab, which was held on a Saturday in May in the northern end of the ground level of the concourse. And this was a one-day event that could be sort of likened to a village gala, and it was deliberately highly accessible and open to everyone, and lots of different activities were planned. Some of them were more serious than others. The day opened, we had the charrette. This is us setting it up, and this was with students from the Manchester School of Architecture as well. So this sort of activism became part of their education. And you can see the drawings that they made for the series of events. And what's sort of quite nice in these pictures, you can see the condition of the bus station as well, those sort of 45 years of neglect. These are the original tables. You can see the original concrete stand and the floor as well, the original rubber flooring in there. And this is setting it up. And we got several hundred visitors, and it was filmed by local TV, and certainly there were interviews on the radio as well. And you can see how we're all dressed. This is the middle of May in England, and the rain was horizontal and it was cold. There's people in scarves and thick coats. This lady, if you can see my mouse with the grey hair there, that is Lady Millicent Baines, who's the wife of the architect who set up Building Design Partnership. So very, very eminent visitor we had there. And series of lectures who comparing the bus station. We got a photographer, Jamie Hawksworth, sorry, who he's a local lad, but he's a photographer. He photographs for places like Vogue and other high-end magazines, and he agreed to come and take a series of photographs of kids and people, rather, not just kids, people in the bus station occupying it. So this exhibition, which we printed onto huge pieces of vinyl and stuck up in the building, and they stayed up for over a year, these series of photographs of people, sort of really empowered people within the building itself. This little lad, in the end, we had to get some red and cover up his badge, his school badge, because he should have been at school. And as soon as he was skiving, the head teacher put in a complaint, so we covered that up. We also had another quite well-known artist, Chris Jones, another Preston boy, who made a large distorted model, not huge, large model. And it was displayed in one of the unoccupied shop units as well. We can see it there. And the Hack Lab itself, where people they came in and they were asked to consider futures for the building, what could be done. And this is a time when people were we're on the cusp of people starting to question the downturn in public transport as well, and this sort of short-sightedness of the city council in wanting to get rid of a bus station. And it was just the start of people starting to use public transport a lot more, whether it's trains or trams. So there's there were loads of ideas to do with this. You see model making. So these are just people coming in and engaging with it. And during this period, the local newspaper, the Lancashire Evening Post, the building itself, when it was due to be demolished, when that was passed, they did a poll, and nobody cared about the building at all. It was the most hated building in Preston. They're saying, why nobody appreciated it. A lot of people didn't appreciate why it was so important, why it was so special. So our intention was to raise the profile of the building. And during this period of time, the profile of the building was raised, and it went from the most hated to the most loved building in Preston, which is a significant thing, really. And once you get the local people on your side, then the local council start to question their position as well. We had postcards. We gave people postcards and asked them to send in or write certain things. And every 20 years, Preston has a guild, has a massive celebration. And the head of the guild celebration, she gave us a talk, and she said, what you have to do is you have to demonstrate again and again and again if you want to save this. It's not about saying something once, you have to say it again and again and just get so many people involved. And it was her advice was very, very good. She organises events like this. She said you just have to keep telling people. There's another event which was a light artist, and using lasers recreated a facsimile of it in the Dockland area of the city itself as well. And then this is part of the guild, and it was focusing on the legacy, which was quite strange, that given that their opposition to the bus station, and yet they talked so eloquently about wanting to take a new strategy for the arts and culture in Preston. There's me on the television some years ago. We had an event called 4 Lost Buildings. Well, our motto was Preston Bus Station has 80 gates and we'd like to keep it that way, which is why we're called Gate 81. We also used to say, let's enjoy the building while we still can. So this is a tour we gave at the time on where we looked at other lost buildings or soon to be lost buildings as well. We made biscuits and sold these, and memorabilia, of course, bags. And we had some school kids printing T-shirts at this event as well, which they were so successful. There they are messing about. We then held a much more serious event at, this is it, BDP Architects head office. And they sponsored it. And these are the architects of the original building, the architects of the building that was proposed to replace the demolished bus station. And I think they were beginning to realise that it was a bit of a lost cause, that demolishing the building and replacing it. They weren't going to get the job. So they started to be on our side as well. And so this is an incredibly serious event, a charrette, where again, it was about design projects for the new, but these were much more urban design projects, not just the building. One of the things about it is it never fitted particularly well within the urban landscape because it was just smashed into the middle of the city. It never sat completely well, and it did need some urban interventions. And this is in their offices, different people presenting it. And that bloke standing up is David Cash, and he was then the head of international, the architects, BDP Architects, and there he is joining in as well, which was very good of him. And these are some of the, you'd see the bus station here, the open court here, and how it links to the city centre, a series of projects like this. Which then, we also went into schools quite a lot. Local primary schools, a series of events like that. And a lot of the reasons for this was certainly to get kids interested in it, but also if you get kids interested, then the parents become interested, and then the value of the building begins to be recognised. We took the building to Antwerp on an international winter school and set it up there. And you'd see it sort of transported to a different place. And the last project was a procession, not an aggressive march, demonstration or protest, but a cavalcade or cortege. It was, again, an opportunity to celebrate the bus station. And it, again, used the students from the Manchester School of Architecture to build a huge model of the building, which they then carried through the streets. And this was supported by the Arts Council as well. So this is all, this project and a lot of the others were funded by the Arts Council. And what was quite amazing as well is that the city councils also supported a lot of the projects, and for the procession we got some funding from them. The very people who were proposing to knock the building down gave us some funding to support this procession. So we constructed about 80 different segments of the building and then carried them through the streets. Again, look at the weather, it's shocking weather. And here it is, heritage not demonstration. You can see it there in front of the bus station itself. There was one moment of sunshine. So I thought I've got to get that picture very, very quickly. And you can see it, just a moment when the sun came out. And there we are in front of the The art gallery itself, as we processed through the town. Now, there were other projects conducted as well. So, that last slide was in the wrong place. It gave you the answer. It couldn't be listed. Well, in the UK, you can apply for listing for a building and that will stop it being demolished. But if it's refused, and it was refused, which is why the council felt they could knock it down, not allowed to apply again for another 5 years, unless some new information is found. So the council had 5 years to get rid of the building. But while the Gate 81 project was going on, the 20th Century Society were also mounting an investigation, and they found out that the concrete for the moulding for the upturned balustrades on the car parking area, we can see here, they were used a system of glass fiber molds, which was incredibly innovative. So this was an excuse to put in another application for listing. And this time, because of the profile of the building had been so much raised, and because the city council were beginning to think that they may have made a mistake, they didn't object to it, which was quite significant by then. So we were able to put in another application. And there we are. This is the evidence that was found for it being innovative. And so we put in an application, it went to an emergency meeting, and we got grade 2 listing. So this means that the building was saved. It wasn't completely saved. The council could still apply to get that overturned, but by then they'd realised that because they are voted in by the people, if they wanted to keep their jobs, they needed to listen to what was going on. So we can see 2014, they agreed that it was going to be kept. And so we celebrated the fact that activism was really helped save the bus station. And our project was then recognised by the government. The British government recognised the project. Every year they give an award, the Heritage Alliance Award, to the project that uses people power the most. And we won it. We got it. There we are, Preston Bus Station. So that was our project, and the building was saved. Since then, the council have spent £17.5 million on the refurbishment of the building. They've recognised that it's going to stay. They've sort of reorganised it a little bit and have made it pedestrian on one side and buses on the other. You can see the sort of the quality of the building. There's much of it's been cleaned, very, very little replaced. And that sort of initial neglect was quite good, because it meant that most of the materials could be reused and could be saved. And you can see these are the original upturns, but they've been cleaned. There's a new fence being put in. I suppose our ideas of safety, health and safety are different, and they're sort of worried that people may leap from these. So there's a new fence being put in. But this, you can see the original cleaned up balustrades. These are, again, all original, just cleaned and mended, and even the clocks, the analog and the digital clocks, have been cleaned and reused. It's Gate 81, therefore, has contributed to the cultural legacy of Preston, and the bus station will have a great impact upon the condition of the city, in that redevelopment plans have to consider the presence of a huge modernist structure on the edge of the city centre. The bus station will continue to be a landmark within the city, and the city will be continued will continue to be defined by the building itself. So our motto, Preston Bus Station has 80 gates, and we would like to keep it that way. We won. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sally. I think we have one question on chat box. I would like to read it. The question is from Nurdan Kuban. Great work. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Just a question. As far as I understand, the building was abandoned. Who held the property of the building? How could you get the permission to hold these activities in the building?
No, it was, I may have misled you. It wasn't abandoned. It was still being used as a bus station.
Okay.
So every day, apparently there were 50,000 people went through it from 4 in the morning until midnight. That it was incredibly well used. School kids, people going to work, things like that. So it was always used. But we did need permission from the city council to be able to hold those events in there, and we got that permission. It was further complicated because in the UK you have county councils, which are counties of big areas of the country, and you have city councils, and the city council owned the building and the county council owned the site. So it was even more complicated than it first appeared, really.
So you have to convince both councils, the city council and the county council, in order to preserve the building, or in order to convince them to preserve the building, of course.
Absolutely. There was yes, both sets of people wanted rid of it because it was costing them both money, and they were always arguing about who should pay for the upkeep, which is why it had been neglected for so long. Why nobody, in the 1980s, it could have had an upgrade where they changed things, and luckily it didn't. For those who love architecture of that sort of era, it was lucky that they did have those arguments, because they could have smashed it apart around and things like that. So it was quite good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I had watched an interview with the if I'm not wrong, with the mayor. So he was saying that they do not have enough budget to save the building. So to knock it down and to construct a new building is cheaper than conserving or preserving it, something like this. At the very beginning of your campaign, probably in 2013, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So it's very good, of course, to convince all those decision makers and to keep the building in the end.
Yes, well, that was one of their arguments, that they didn't have enough money. But there are various, the central government gives money for certain projects like this, and therefore they had to apply for it, which that is what they did. When they spent £17.5 million on the refurbishment of it, that wasn't local money, that was central government money that they then were able to apply for once they'd made the decision to keep it. But they said they didn't have the money to keep it because they didn't want it, because they didn't, the question is, a lot of people didn't appreciate it in the same way as we would appreciate it. A lot of people just assumed that everywhere had a building like that, and it wasn't special. And there's also that sort of sense that, it's sort of old-fashioned. But it's like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that appreciation problem is all over the world as a common thing. So we have similar cases, of course, in some public buildings in Izmir very recently. Our excuse is the earthquake, for example. So is it strong enough for another earthquake, something like this? So its structural condition is questioning at the moment. It becomes an excuse for the building to knock it down or to preserve it. Yes, we have to struggle with all those excuses.
Yes, absolutely. This is why up until the council before it was because they'd already commissioned the shopping centre scheme, they'd already, in about 2008 or 9, decided that they were going to knock the bus station down. And there'd been a number of other campaigns and other more sort of government-based and 20th century society-based, nationally based campaigns to save it. And these weren't working, which is why we as activists were working at local level. And we were deliberately raising the profile of the building with the local population. And that was what was sort of quite significant about our project, because without the local support, then the council could do whatever they like, because they weren't bothered about national issues. But as soon as local opinion changed on it, their jobs were at risk. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of as simple as that, really. And that was a sort of significant thing within this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question again on the chat box. Zeran is more interested in landscape interventions. You said that the original design had some defects in this aspect. What new arrangements were made after the interventions or in the last project?
Yeah, so when the bus station was designed in the late 1960s, and it's an incredibly big building, and it was just placed at the northern side of the city centre. And what it effectively did, there's a main street that runs along the ridge of Preston itself, and that's the main shopping street, and it effectively blocked off one end of that. And that end became really quite run down. So the prosperous area of the city centre shifted gradually because of the way people moved. It wasn't, the initial architecture, urban design was really not very good at all. And interestingly, reading the sort of architectural press from 1969, they compliment the building so much. They sort of say it's so exciting, but they say the urban relationships are really very poor, and they were never properly worked out. So that, for instance, to access it, people either had to go in through an underpass because there was a dual carriageway, so a 4-lane highway to cross, or they had to cross an open car park. So it was never very good, but and it's still not very good. There is still a problem with the relationship between the city centre and this building, and that's one of the reasons. Another reason why it's other buildings. If another building was demolished, which is really rather poor, which is immediately in front of it, it would remove that stopper and open it all up. Interestingly, the city council, not long after they did the refurbishment, they held an international competition to extend the building in what's called a youth zone. And it was won by an international practice who made this very expensive proposal for this building in the forecourt, not attached to the building. It didn't work attaching it, just slightly detaching it. But this was never constructed, because it's sort of a building as individual and iconic as that, you can't extend. You can extend it, making it longer and longer and longer, but you can't put anything on the side of it because of that design. And that is one of the things about modernist structures. They are designed to be seen as single entities rather than elements that are all joined up to the contextual environment. But yeah, there is a problem. It's a very good question that there is a real problem with the urban environment. And there still is. It's better than it was because there's now bridges, and the open car park actually is now a much more of a garden to walk through. But yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem that still needs solving, really. But at least the building's going to be there, so to solve it, there is that. There is something to work with. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. We have 3 or 4 comments and questions. The first one is from Ayça Özmen. Thanks a lot for your presentations and sharing this inspirational example with us. One of the success of Gate 81 is preventing from demolition. And in my opinion, another success is preserving it with its own function. How could this happen? Was it because of grade 2? Because also the purposes of community at the workshop seem more due to commercial use. So to keep its original function, how could it be possible? Is it a grade 2
well, the listing
limitation or what?
Yeah, the listing. This is why the competition was held for the youth zone, and the idea was to convert some of the building into the youth zone. But the thing about Preston Bus Station is it makes a very, very good bus station, and it's bus station below with layers of car parking above, and it's a really good position for a car park as well for the access to the city centre. And I don't know if it's happening in Turkey as well, but public transport, the role of public transport, even over the last 5 years, has radically changed. More and more people are encouraged to take public transport and combine that with walking, get some exercise rather than just driving everywhere. So its use has become even greater in the last 5 years. And people, and also because of the refurbishment of it, it used to be a bit scary. I wouldn't, after dark, I was quite hesitant about going there because it could be a bit scary, but now it isn't. It's a place where, you know, as a female, I would happily walk through there without any worries. And my kids could walk through there without any worries at all. So it's the refurbishment and the change of attitude to the people. I've encouraged more people to use it. And there's now a proposal, the City Council is seriously thinking about trams, reintroducing trams into the city centre. And you can imagine a really long, thin building with a tram going next to it. It's perfect. So it actually makes a really good transport interchange. So it was half the listing, half of the fact that shopping in the city centre is no longer the future. Getting people into the city centre and getting them to do other things and spend money, but people spend their money online or out of town shopping centres. So it's shopping isn't the future anymore. So yeah, that's why it stayed a bus station, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yes, I agree totally. Another comment and a question is from Sibel Bozdoğan. Great activism, thank you. One general question. Brutalism seems to have a renewed appreciation in the West. In the UK, has the advantage of being part of national cultural heritage, going back to Rainer Benham and others. What would you say to those trying to preserve modernist, brutalist buildings of the global South, where such buildings are not seen as ugly, but also alien to native or national culture? What is the role of historians, theorists to make the public own such buildings? Thanks also for Document Turkey for this presentation. Thank you, Sibel, for being with us.
No, that is a really good question. And 10 years ago, it was like that in the West, certainly in the UK. 10 years ago, people didn't care about brutalism and brutalist buildings. And a lot of that has been raised through just a renewed interest in them, through national press, national TV, things like that. So in the same way as in the 1950s, a lot of 19th century buildings were knocked down. And now we really, really regret it. And it's not just in the UK. For instance, you sort of think about Penn Station in New York, and it's been replaced by this sort of horrible box, and it's sort of dreadful, and yet it was a magnificent building. And there is a sort of general recognition that we've got rid of a lot of things and we really regret it now. And a lot of what has been reported about brutalism buildings is that we will regret them when they've gone. And so there is this sort of sense of understanding why they're good, because that's the thing. They're a generation old and you don't like the things that had happened a generation ago. You want new things. So as they get a bit older, then they begin to be appreciated a lot more. And a lot of it is just through people talking about they're really good. So you have Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts and people talking generally, and you get bits in the newspapers, you get reporters and things saying that it's good. And it is just about raising the profile of these things, really. And again, that goes down to activism and how you can do that, whether this is a local or a national level. And certainly the Preston Bus Station campaign, it was reported nationally. So it went from a local issue to a national issue. That wasn't just Gate 81, that was other people being involved in that. But it was quite a lot of me ringing up people and saying, come on, do something about this building. And can you do a report on it? And from my position as an academic in a School of Architecture, I could sort of start talking to people in the national press, and they'd come down and give a story about it and things like that. So again, it's about just local activism, really. And then you get people from other cities. Like in Plymouth, they had the Tricorn Centre, and we got involved with a campaign to save their building, which didn't work actually. It was demolished. But there is that sense of just getting involved in things, really. And it is difficult. It is difficult, but we'll regret it. We will regret these things if they go.
The next question is quite similar to Ayça''s, as Özgün, you already mentioned yourself. Is there anything to add? Please, just you can ask yourself if you would like to ask it again, or otherwise.
Yeah,
What shall I do? Shall I skip it?
No, you can just,
could you please? Yeah, please.
So thanks a lot for this amazing presentation, Sally. So it was amazing. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Have you got a building that you want to save?
So the question actually after my question is related to this one. So the yellow building in Şanlıurfa, Yıldız Hocam, I think you will also go through this. I'm stopping, and please go ahead, Yıldız Hocam.
Which building you mean? I couldn't get the yellow one in Şanlıurfa, the ugliest one.
Yeah, the question of let me check it again. The question of Remzi Can Tanrı'dan ister is something like that.
Okay, I will. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
I'll go with it. So the next question is from Remzi Can. First of all, I wish the event to be repeated in many years in the city where I live these days. We are talking about the demolition of the building, which is being propagated as the world's most absurd building in the literature beyond all the reasons justified. This building style has a very strong place in the urban memory due to the difference in shape and form. The demolition of the building has now been tendered and the costly demolition work has been started. As the local architects of the city, we want to talk about this transformability so that it has more efficient, usable areas. I'm curious about your views and thoughts on the yellow building in the context of Preston Bus Station. Is there still anything that can be done? Remzi, could you please?
I will share the building if you want.
Yes, please, because Sally has no idea about the building.
Sally has no idea what it is.
Wow.
Yes, it's a Pomo one.
Sort of postmodern, but very unusual.
It's tremendous, isn't it?
It's very
yes, the authorities announced the building as the most ugliest and absurd building of the world, and they would like to knock it down. So
It is brutalist in size, not in design concept, but size-wise it's brutal, I think.
But today also we're talking about the POMO buildings being appreciated as heritage ones. So we are questioning about POMO anyhow. So maybe you would like to add anything?
No, absolutely, because postmodern buildings, POMO buildings, they are they come after the brutal, don't they? So they're actually even more disliked because we're moving into the next period, aren't they? And that's why it is important to save them. And they've actually started demolition, have they?
Yes, I think yes. They've started.
They started.
Yes,
okay.
I think there was a tender. They already chose who is going to demolish it, but did they start the demolishing?
Physically, they didn't.
Maybe Remzi Can.
Remzi
Can knows, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is located in Kahramanmaraş, not in Şanlıurfa, by the way, Özgür.
Yeah, sorry for
the building.
I'm really sorry for the mistake. Sorry.
Well, it's about, I mean, the thing about Gate 81 is we deliberately worked at a local level. And one of our mottos was appreciate the building while we still can. Because the number of interviews that I had with sort of on the television and the radio, and they're going, why do you want to keep this building? But it's going to be demolished. What, you know, why are you even bothering with the campaign? Because they said, well, it's definitely going to happen. Whatever you do, it will happen. And I'm going, well, it doesn't matter. We still got to, even if we've only got months of it, let's enjoy those few months of it. But it was about just as often as possible telling people what a great building it was. And I don't know, can you get on the television? Can you get on the radio? Can you start talking to people about why it's important? Because one of the things we did was explain why it was important, not just sort of the size of it and the shape of it, but the sort of the significance of this as a structure in the world. And then we were lucky with the bus station because it was then there was a book came out that was about this big, but that thick, called The 1,000 Buildings You've Got to See Before You Die, or the World's Best 1,000 Buildings or something. And it was in there. We'd got it into that book. So all of a sudden people are thinking, oh, well, maybe we're special. And it does look like a special building, the yellow building. So it's about how you just keep telling people that it's special, really. It's like Birmingham, which is a city to the south of Manchester in the middle of England, has loads and loads of brutalist buildings, and they wanted to save their library. But they said one of the problems is there's 10 or 20 brutal buildings there. So to keep the library, which was replaced by something designed by, I think, OMA, it wasn't special because they had so many of them. Preston only had one bus station, only has one building like that. It looks like your yellow building, you've only got one of them. And if that goes, then you haven't got any. And maybe that's the angle that you keep telling people. But you have to be prepared to do it. I mean, I was prepared to go out and give out leaflets and go on the radio and go on the telly and be there the worst thing was 6:45 on a rainy winter's morning on the radio being interviewed. So that was pretty awful, but you just, you've got to want to do it.
Okay. Yes, the last comment and question is from Manchester. His son, yes, I think you know each other.
Ennis is one of my students in Manchester.
Okay. He's asking, or he's saying, thank you for the presentation, Sally, and hello from Manchester. During the refurbishment, was changing the functions of some parts of the building considered? Why was it decided to clean and replace only if needed, instead of modernizing the interior of the gates, screens, clocks?
So because the building was either going to be saved or demolished, and it was either a bus station or not a bus station. Changing the function wasn't considered by the City Council. Certainly, if you, early on in the presentation, I showed you some proposals that people had done for changing the building, changing the function of the building. And at one time, there was a big department store as part of the Tithe Barn. We're going to take that site. John Lewis Partnership. Mm-hmm. You may have heard of them, but they were going to take that site. And so we did have a proposal for how that building could be converted for the John Lewis building, rather than them just knock it down and build a new building department store for them. And then, of course, there was the youth zone, which was going to be attached to it. But one of the things about it is it's a building that makes a really good bus station, and not very good for anything else. It's sort of fairly uncompromising. So there is that sense that that's why it is so good that it's just been kept. And it's needed as well. That's the other thing. It's not like it's not needed, because the council were proposing to build a new bus station to replace it, a slightly smaller one, but they did acknowledge that they needed one. This is on a little bit of a big piece of wasteland just a bit further out of the city centre. Why was it decided to clean and replace? Because there was that sense of integrity that came with cleaning and just replacing the broken stuff rather than modernising. And that's what I was saying about, if in the 80s and the 90s it had been modernised, it wouldn't have been as precious as the fact that all of the fittings and the materials dated back to the late 1960s. And they're incredibly robust, the concrete and the timber, and even the acrylic screens were still intact, and the tiles on the walls, they didn't have to replace that many of them. So robust was it. So there is that sense of it became a conservation project, a conservation of a modernist structure. I mean, there were a few parts where there was concrete fatigue and bits there was sort of a couple of little structural problems which had to be sorted, but mostly it was just cleaning. Even the rubber floor, the original rubber floor from 1969, was cleaned and replaced. The biggest thing they had to do was I told you that to get to it, there were these underpasses. Mm-hmm. They blocked those off because then they were dangerous places to be. And what they had to do with those is they filled them full of concrete. They just pumped, which doesn't sound very sustainable really, but thousands and thousands of tons of concrete into the underpasses, so nothing can happen in those ever. So yeah, it was, why was it decided to clean and replace? Because it's a conservation job rather than a remodeling job, I think.
And for that reason, it got the Knoll Prize in the end.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, it did win. The conservation project did win prizes, so that was good.
Yeah. So the next question is from Crystal. She's one of my students. Thank you for organizing this event and sharing such a precious example of saving a cultural asset. My question is mostly related to the connection of the community to this building. Did you interview any of the people using the building, living around and working there? What kind of past relationships do they have with this building, and what were their thoughts about the demolition or continuity of the building? I know you talked about the activism involved, but I was curious about any personal stories or in-person thoughts.
Yes, we on the sort of the Hack Lab, the big celebration where we had loads of people just wandering in and taking part. We did loads of interviewing then. We also, before that event, we came into the city quite a lot and interviewed people, not just people who were using the bus station, but people who lived around there and got stories of them. So stories for instance, about when it first opened and what it was like, and the idea that it was designed to look like an airport lounge and had soft furnishing and carpets and display cabinets and things like that. And so there's interviews with people who first used it and people who still used it. And then there were also interviews with people who would like to use it, but didn't use it for whatever reason, whether it was because they were nervous about going into it or because they would rather use their car. And we used postcards quite a lot for that. So we gave out postcards and asked them to send them back and had all those on display. So there was a lot of interviews with people about their relationship with the building. And thought about demolition. What was quite interesting, it was the bus drivers. They didn't care at all. I thought they would be really proud of their building. Yeah. And they were just, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? It doesn't matter where you get your bus from. You could just catch a bus anywhere. And they were the most disappointing. I thought we'll get the bus drivers involved. And they just didn't want to know.
Okay, thank you. The last comment and question on the chat box is from Ebru, co-chair of the Commonwealth Turkey. Thank you for sharing this interesting and important case. You mentioned one similar case was the process, an example for other similar campaigns against demolishment in UK, probably those who are involved in.
There's been a few. They are getting more and more successful. So, for instance, there was in Plymouth, the Tricorn Centre. They had a lot of they had a campaign to save it, and then there was there's a lot of housing in London. They had campaigns to save them. But it's interesting because as I was saying, that as we look back at things now, and some of those structures now, people are saying, oh, I really wish we hadn't got rid of those. So, for instance, in Manchester, there was a lot of modernist housing estates, great big sort of concrete crescents, which were really quite unsuccessful. Not only were the sort of, they weren't suitable for the families that were put in there, in them. So they weren't used particularly well. They also had a very, very bad heating system, which was incredibly expensive. So most people didn't use the heating system. They just used a plug-in fire or something, which meant that the damp got into the buildings and then they were full of cockroaches and things like that. So a lot of the problems of those buildings were due to the management of them. And then once it's badly managed, then it gets neglected and then people start to hate it, which to a certain extent was the Preston Bus Station. It was neglected and people didn't love it because of that. But now people are starting to regret the loss of buildings. And I think that's really important, because as soon as you start to regret some buildings, then you can use that as the basis for campaigns in the future. And then it might be with the yellow building, you start to say, look at the things we've already lost. And we can't afford to lose any more of these significant structures. So yeah, those if you want a story about unsuccess, I'd go to the Tricorn Centre. Really, it was a very sad, very, very sad, the sort of what happened there.
Robin Hood Gardens is another sad one.
Yeah,
I was very sad about that one. I personally.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what's it been replaced with? Yeah.
Okay, the last question is from Ilke, I think. She would like to ask or make a comment. Yes. Ilke.
Hi, and thank you very much for sharing with us your experiences. You informed us that the council already decided to demolish the building in 2008, and original firm who designed the bus station, BDP, I think, BDP Architecture, already proposed a new project for the site. And please interfere if I'm wrong. Well, I understand that Sir Baines, who was the founder of the firm and the original designer of the building, passed away in 2003. Do we know anything about his views about the building? Because you showed us his wife in 2013 events, and how was the designer architect's family's contribution to your campaign, and how did their approach, BDP's approach, change exactly? Were there any disagreements already at the beginning in the firm, maybe? And could you tell us more about your collaboration with the BDP?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely spot on. Yes, you got it completely right. Grenfell Baines, I mean, he was really, really proud of the Preston Bus Station. It's sort of well recognised. He's talked about it quite a lot, how it was a very significant building for his practice, and how and also he lived in Preston, so he was really, really proud of it. And I know his wife, Lady Millicent Baines, she was really behind the campaign. In fact, those biscuits that I showed you, she was the person who baked them. We made her the Preston Bus Station stamp for biscuits, and she made them and brought them. So it was good to have her on her side, and she's very, very vocal as well. She's came over from Prague during the Second World War on the Kindertransport. So she's been a spokesperson for that. I mean, it's a completely different thing, but part of that campaign. So actually has quite a high profile nationally, and you quite often hear her on the radio and things like that. So to have her involvement was quite good. And also you sort of talk about, you asked about BDP. Now, they had about the same time as our campaign, they had a vote for the best build. It was 60 years after they'd been formed, and they said, what's the best building? And for most of the time, Preston Bus Station was winning that as the best building they'd ever designed. It came second in the end. But so it was obvious that it was recognised in the architectural community as a significant building, and but equally, they are a commercial operation. So they wanted to spend, I don't know how many millions and millions of pounds. They wanted the commission for a new shopping centre on this site. So it was quite difficult for them. But I think when they realised it wasn't going to happen, the shopping centre wasn't going to happen, the building may still be demolished, but that they weren't going to get the project for the shopping centre. That's when their position reversed. I know that sounds a bit cynical, doesn't it? But that's when their position reversed, and they started to support the campaign, which is why their head, David Cash, who was head of BDP globally, he personally rang me up and sort of said, you know, we'd like to do a charrette with you. So, and they sponsored it. So, you know, they paid for everything in their offices. So that they began to recognise that maybe they would be thought of as quite bad to just knock this down, who want it to be knocked down, and there was a change happening in people's perception of the building. Yeah, so we getting their support was quite significant, really, as well. But I think the biggest thing was the city council realising that the people who voted them in wanted to keep this building. And that's the most significant thing, I think, really.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
Sally.
you.
Thank you.
Yes, is there anybody who would like to share any thoughts, comments? Otherwise, we will thank Sally for being with us in this event, and for you all, of course, for being with us today. And just a notice, we would like to take a picture, so we kindly ask you if it's possible to open up your to turn your cameras on, and let's have a picture. Aygün, we are waiting for your.
Yes. Yes, it's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sally. Thank you again for being with us, and have a good Sunday. Çok teşekkürler herkese. Hoşça kalın.
Thank you very much, and good luck with the yellow building.
Thank you. We have many buildings for
And all
starting.
the others, I would say.
And the others, yeah. Well, good luck with your campaign. I hope it goes well. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Sally.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cyprus.
Bye.
Bye, Devrim. Bye. Okay. Yes, they are leaving.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much,
Bye,
Sally.
Sally.
Bye, thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you.
Kapatalım.
Great job.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.